It's time to confess. I know the truth. You're a computer expert, maybe even a programmer, a network engineer, or administrator, and yet you harbor a dark secret. Oh, we all have one, but yours is one that was born in dark shame almost from the first day that you touched an IBM-compatible machine. I'm talking about the little secret. That even though you are the one that friends come to for advice on their computer problems, or even when buying new equipment, that maybe you're not such an expert after all. What if perhaps there were immense gaps in your knowledge, ones way down in the foundational basics, so deep that nothing else you knew about computers could truly be trusted? But what could be so fundamental? I mean, it would be like if computers only had one error message, abort, retry, fail, and you didn't even know what the difference between abort and fail was. Ooh, looks like I might have stung a sore point. That's going to irritate any latent imposter syndrome you've still got, but fear not. Today in Dave's Garage, I'm going to make you a master of MS-DOS errors. What's the deal with abort, retry, fail? What do they mean? When does it happen? And which one should you pick if it ever happens to you? And whatever happened to ignore anyway? All today in Dave's Garage. So hey, before we get into abort, retry, fail, I've got big news. Really, really big news. Like big industry news. News so big that I had to sign NDAs and make promises and respect an embargo and the whole deal. And better yet, I'm the only one that has the news. But that's literally all I can say. So what's my point? I was gonna say watch the channel closely for the next week or so because you don't want to miss it, but that's silly. And B, they make something already just for that. You just click on the bell icon and then you select all. So please indulge me and turn it on for my channel. You know I don't make a lot of content, so you'll never get inundated, and worst case, you click on it again to turn it off. But this way, you won't miss the biggest news ever. Well, at least on my channel, and by a long ways. But perhaps I've said too much already.
Who is it?
Goons!
Who?
Hired goons!
Hired goons?
And now, back to good old abort, retry, fail. It's a bit of a secret club, really, for those of us who actually know what it means, and I'm going on something of a membership drive today as I explain what the heck it was all about. As I alluded to in the opening, if you made any use of computers back when this era was common, then you likely saw it a great number of times without ever really thinking too much about it. Since none of the options really seemed to do any good, they were all about equivalent, it seemed. So let's ask the big questions. What is abort, retry, fail? How does it work? And what do the choices mean? How can it happen? And how do you decide which one to pick? Well, deep within command.com, which is the core program of MS-DOS, there is something known as the critical error handler. There are certain error conditions that are deemed critical, and as you might imagine, they are things like disk read error, disk write error, disk not present, disk not ready, and so on. These are conditions that mean the computer cannot continue on its own, but that might be recoverable, so the operating system wants your input on how it should proceed. Or, if recovery isn't viable, how precisely should it handle the failure? In other words, MS-DOS knows something serious is going down, but it doesn't know how to handle it. So it's going to give you, the wise and all-knowing operator, the decision on how to proceed. To that end, you're given up to 4 choices: abort, retry, ignore, and fail. Dealing with nonsense computer errors is, and always was, pretty low on most people's lists of things that they wanted to do during the day. So while it might be a challenging puzzle for someone like you or I, for most people it's equivalent of PC load letter. Annoying, unhelpful, and generally unwelcome intrusion into their day. Now, as you may know, I have autism, which means I spend a lot of time as an observer, watching the neurotypical people around me and learning how they act and behave. From there, I can selectively emulate or ignore behaviors that I like or don't like, and that whole process forms the basics of what's known as autistic masking, or the subtle act of trying to act quote-unquote normal when you decide that it's to your benefit to do so. I find it fascinating watching people like my wife. She's smart, graduated from the same college I did, and was even the PC tech coordinator for her office back when offices had such people on staff. But even though she knows what she's doing if she took the time, I swear that when it comes to dialog boxes and error prompts, she selects her response based on whatever she thinks will just get it over the fastest. Now, when I'm confronted with something like abort, retry, fail, I take it as something of a sacred duty to the data on my machine. Backed up or not, I'd rather not grenade the data on any of my machine's hard drives, so I take such messages seriously. I do my best to understand what each option means and to pick the course of action most likely to preserve my data and return my machine to smooth functioning. Contrast this with my lovely wife, who will hit retry 3 times and then abort twice hard. Retry, 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 abort, abort. If that doesn't work, she'll be banging the escape key and looking for Task Manager. Whatever it takes to get rid of the damn dialogue, because I think in her mind, the dialogue is the contemporaneous problem and threat, whereas I see it as a symptom of something else that I must go fix before it gets worse and creates even more work and angst for me. But then she has skills that I do not, like when trying to find something in a kitchen drawer, and I look in the drawer and it's clearly not visible. Thus, it cannot be there, and yet she has this thing she does where she moves the stuff from the top and she discovers things at whole other layers. It's cool. But I have as much chance of finding a lost key in the bottom back of the junk drawer as she does of finding a key under the registry and HKey local machine. We're just different. Which explains why I know what the options for abort, retry, and fail do. And now I shall pass that arcane knowledge along to you, all for the low price of subscribing to the channel, clicking the bell icon, and setting it to all. Now, of all your options, abort is the most severe. Contrary to what you might have guessed, it does not merely abort the operation that failed. No, it actually aborts the entire program. It immediately terminates with great prejudice, tearing the tent down around itself without allowing for any saving of data or cleanup of resources. If it happened to be halfway through saving your data, well, I guess you've got half a file. It just nukes the program that dared do whatever it was that led to the critical error right then and there. Problem solved, sort of. Next, we have retry. I bet you already know what retry does. It retries the operation. This was actually a very common case in the olden days. In fact, the whole notion of abort, retry, fail comes from the CP/M operating system. In those days, not all disk drives had sensors to confirm that the floppy disk drive door was closed. If you tried to read or write to the disk when the drive door was open, it would just hang and wait for you to close the door. In fact, CP/M users often took advantage of that feature as a way of managing multiple disks. You could flip the drive open when the machine went to load or save, then swap in the appropriate disk at the very last second. The Wikipedia version of the story is that when MS-DOS came along on IBM's PC, which finally did have a door sensor, the conundrum of what to do if the door was open faced the designers. If they had chosen to return an error immediately, that would have broken compatibility with CP/M, which it said was then an important goal. And yet, since it'd be silly to just hang when the computer now knew fully well what was going on and the door was open, they decided to simply ask the user what it was that they wanted to do. Would you like to close the door and try again, perhaps? Wikipedia is close, but not quite correct. For one, the disk change logic in the IBM PC was not fully implemented, thereby either saving IBM a few pennies on every machine and circuitry, or more likely, making it so that they could source the drive more broadly, thereby saving a few pennies on each machine that way. I talked to Mark Zibikowski today for the rest of the story. If the name doesn't ring a bell, his initials might. They are the first 2 bytes of most every MS-DOS and Windows application ever written, since he defined the file format. It's good to be the king. Anyway, he was back there way before even MS-DOS 2 with Tim Patterson, and he pointed out that MS-DOS supported more than the IBM PC. It also had to work with a host of compatibles. Some of them had door latch sensors, some did not, and some, as noted with the IBM, had a disabled or partially implemented sensor. One of the main purposes of a door latch sensor is to prevent you from swapping disks in the middle of a write operation. Well, without a locking one, they can't prevent it, but they can stop from writing so they don't trash the new disk. So, in cases where no real disk latch sensor was available, they created a virtual sensor. It would tell you whether it was safe to write to the drive, but how would it work? They assumed that humans could only change a disk so fast. So, Mark, Chris Peters, and Aaron Reynolds gathered around to see how fast they could change disks and fool the virtual latch. They tried it individually and then as a team sport, but it turns out they could not change disks in less than 2 seconds. So the virtual latch was really telling not if the disk was ejected or open, but rather whether it could still be assumed to be there. And the answer was based on whether everything had been okay with reading and writing for at least the last 2 seconds. This also served to confirm that the disk cache didn't need to be invalidated. And Mark said that the 2-second heuristic is still used in Windows to this day. A different situation would be if you had write-protected a floppy and then tried to save your work to it. Would you like to fail the operation because the disk shouldn't be written to, or would you like to take the write-protect tab off and try again? You get the choice. This is where abort would be particularly dangerous, terminating the program and losing your work before it was even saved, which is why it helps to know the difference. These recoverable situations are the origins of retry. It would also be used for things like reading and writing disk sectors, but the original impetus for it was user-correctable errors. You could also retry on disk errors, but other than sketchy media like floppies and maybe MFM hard disks, the odds of it actually working were very slim. After all, on any kind of modern drive, if a read error happened, it is already retried as many times as could possibly matter behind the scenes anyway. And if it's a write error, the drive would silently move the data to a spare sector and then mark the defective one to be excluded from future use, all without you being any the wiser. According to Wikipedia, there is only a singular case of an error where retry is your only option. No abort, no fail, no ignore. Just retry, all by its lonesome. And believe it or not, I wrote it. Back when I was in MS-DOS, I was working on the write-back disk caching, and there was a very unwelcome possibility that a user could save their work, it would go into the cache, the program would exit, and then a disk write error would occur. The cache would have no options. All they could do is let the user know about it. Abort made no sense since the program wasn't even running anymore. Ignore could very well corrupt the entire file system structure of the disk itself, and so retry was the really only appropriate option. And it's the only option you got, retry. You could press retry as many times as you liked, or reboot the system and hope for the best, but that was it. And apparently, my use of it that way is the only case of such an error with just a retry option. Next, we turn to ignore. Ignore was a dangerous option in its own right, and couldn't be applied to things like disk missing or not ready. It would lie to the application and claim success for the operation, all while silently allowing it to fail. But sometimes the perfect is the enemy of the good, and if you can get back 99% of your text file by ignoring the error, so in certain circumstances, ignoring the error makes the most sense. The key to the ignore option is that MS-DOS would then effectively lie to the application and claim success. If the data in the read buffer were complete garbage, so be it, you asked for it. As the years went by, the number of things that could be ignored really dwindled. As noted, you could never ignore the user-created errors like having the floppy drive open, and read-write errors simply became much less frequent with modern hardware. By the time of MS-DOS 6, there were hardly any ignore cases left. And finally, fail. Fail is really your best option, particularly when it's for a case where the user themselves can't provide much assistance. What fail does is simply report back to the application that the operation could not be completed, and it passes back an appropriate error code. What the application does with that, if it does anything at all, is completely dependent on the application itself and how it chooses to handle it. In the very early days, apps didn't usually have much error handling logic at all, and so managing your own errors made a lot of sense. By later years, with more advanced applications, it might make sense to let Quicken or Norton decide how to proceed, and fail does precisely that. Fails the operation and lets the app know that it's up to it on how to deal with it. That's it. That's your 4 options: abort, retry, ignore, and fail. And now you know what they do. Imagine how useful that info would have been 25 years ago. Well, better late than never. Speaking of which, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please make sure to do so and to turn on the notifications so that you don't miss episodes like Why Are Blue Screens Blue and the Computer Language Drag Racing series, where we put languages head to head, all with the same prime number problem to see how fast they really are. Don't forget to check out the free Discord link for channel subscribers in the video description. There are usually more than 1,000 people online at any one time, so there's usually something going on. If you have any interest in matters related to autism, Asperger's, or ASD, please be sure to check out my book on the subject. You can read the free sample chapter, Burgers with Bill Gates, right now on Amazon. Check out the link to it in the video description. Book promotion aside, I'm mostly in this for the subs and likes, so if you found the episode some combination of entertaining and informative, please leave me one of each. In the meantime and in between time, I hope to see you next time, right here in Dave's Garage. This little chair will be waiting for one of you, and a rocking chair for another who likes to rock, and a big armchair for 2 to curl up in. All next time on Dave's Garage.